This event is called the Boniuk Institute Spring Convening on Religious Pluralism and Conflict. We were very successful, we think, in bringing together the best scholars. We are joining to listen to over 60 individual presentations about these topics. We're having public discussions. We are having private meetings and small group meetings, and to generate new research ideas where we might study the extent of religious pluralism and conflict, and then dream together about how we can use the resulting research to make a real difference in our world. We've heard some very powerful presentations these days together, and it's just increased my imagination, I think really the imagination of many of the scholars at the Boniuk Institute, for the broad variety of ways that religious traditions might engage with one another, and the broad variety of ways they don't engage with one another, the kinds of discrimination and prejudices and inappropriate power relations that are still very much present in many places in global societies. And so we want to really be forward-looking and pursuing engagement while recognizing and understanding the kinds of factors that also lead to conflict, violence, and discrimination. These are people from 9 different nations, from a variety of different disciplines, from a variety of different perspectives on research, from a variety of different religious traditions themselves. And so we want them, once they get in the same room, to develop deep relationships, to imagine future research collaborations. And then we're hoping, and this is like our hope for the future after the convening, is that this work will really have legs, that it will happen. And so we're in the process of raising grant money to try to really sponsor this work. So we'd like to be known in the Boniuk Institute as the real hub of convening to the aim of building research collaborations, to the aim of actually doing that research. In our current time, it's a moment when an institute like ours really, I think, deservedly is in the spotlight. We are seeing so much more religious violence and conflict around the world. And we're also seeing amazing efforts towards a robust religious pluralism around the world as well. And so an institute like ours really has the capacity to understand the conditions that lead to religious violence and conflict, but also the conditions that lead to a healthy, engaged, robust religious pluralism. And so we are trying to convene scholars together who really share that mission and really want to see that research matter in the world. We're hopeful, fingers crossed, that we will be able to continue this convening on a yearly basis. We think there is something special about being a hub for others to really encourage a variety of scholarship that makes a difference in the world. And so we'd like to be known for that. And so we think that creating convenings, a very robust convening once a year on religious pluralism and conflict would perhaps be the way to do that.
I read my seminar proposal a few weeks ago, and I found one paragraph that was very, very interesting, that one of the reasons I want to come to RISE at that time was because of the Boniuk Institute. But I mean, my journey to Boniuk Institute has been really, really fruitful. It's one of the things that I adore and value the most about my journey in RISE. One of the basic things that I think conditions that we need to understand is that education matters. I feel that religious education really matters, that many people do not understand their religion at first, and even some scholars have, given a wrong interpretation of religions, right? So I think religious education is very, very important, and that religious organizations and governments should invest in religious education. Religious education is what I think is the most important thing that should be championed by scholars. I think that our research should transition from that sense of theoretical frameworks to the public. And that's why I love the Religion and Public Life program here at RISE, because there's a need for the study of religion to move to things that involve society. So what happens with religion in the workplace? What happens with religion in institutions? We should be able to position ourselves as resource centers for people out there in the society and make our research relevant. I believe that the public is out there looking for things to read, things to know more about religion, to know about religious diversity in the society, how religion can be navigated in the society, in the workplace, and how religion intersects with sciences, with tech, with everything, AI. So, I mean, people are yearning to listen to this kind of things. What is the role of religion in politics? How is religion influencing our political choices and all of that? And this kind of writings should not be domiciled in the academic publishing and journals. Public scholarship should be taken very, very seriously, and that funding should be given to public scholarship, because public scholarship is what is beneficial to the public. And I believe that we have a bigger reach, a bigger audience in the public than in the academic space. I don't want my research to be kept cold. I want it to be in conversations. I want to be in the conversation.
Yeah, I think we're in a particularly challenging environment these days. I mean, I think religious conflict is increasing around the world. I think we, for a while, seem to be headed towards a more multicultural society as globalization was sort of advancing. And I think the last 10 years or so, we're starting to see pushback against that, and more tribalism, more fracturing, growing polarization, more mistrust. And I don't think we know how to live with each other. I think we've gotten to the point where the tendency to sort of forget our differences and try to sort of move together towards some kind of collective future is falling by the wayside. I think there's much more emphasis on identity, on difference. Some of it is positive and important, and some of it is leading to a lot of tensions and challenges. And so figuring out what does it mean to live together in a way that respects difference and respects identity. So not the kind of there's a form of pluralism that I suppose was being advanced for quite some time, and some people still embrace it, which is there are no differences. We really essentially are the same. That is not working anymore, I don't think. And so figuring out how to embrace pluralism without relativism is really crucial. So pluralism, I think, has something to do with embracing identity without denigrating the other, right? So just because we belong to a particular community, or a particular, whether it's a religious community or ethnic community, or any other kind of identity that doesn't denigrate doesn't sort of necessarily have to devalue other kinds of perspectives. But the challenge then is how do we respect the other, especially when we disagree, right? Politically or religiously, what does it mean then to accord value and worth to the perspective of another? That requires perspective taking. It requires the ability to say, maybe I have something to learn from the other that could strengthen my own understanding of who I am. That kind of intellectual humility, which also might mean maybe I'm wrong, maybe my political beliefs need to be corrected and changed, maybe my religious beliefs need to change. That's, I think, the real challenge, where I think it's harder for us now to be able to do that. So that's, I think, a particular kind of skill or capacity that we need to figure out how to develop. Yeah, so I mean, I think I'll just put two proposals. I mean, one is, I think as scholars we need to work with practitioners and people on the ground who are actually doing the work of pluralism, right? And who are, where are people seeing success, right? Where do we see practical initiatives that are actually having some kind of impact? Maybe we should try to measure that impact and see like what actually leads to pluralism. What kinds of metrics should we be using to assess whether we're advancing in this direction or not? Yeah, I think we need to be thinking about, beyond the scholarship we do on these questions, what kinds of practices could we be engaging in, and what kinds of spaces could we be building that could help us better promote the ability to really respect the other, to live together in a way that's conducive to our collective flourishing. I think really figuring out what pluralism means in today's context, in light of all of these tensions, is really critical. I think it's really critical to bring together different points of view from different disciplines to try to understand what we mean by pluralism and what it looks like, and how to study it and how to measure it, and what it looks like in a variety of contexts, right? And I think it really is a challenge that no particular discipline can solve. And I think we really need to be thinking together and listening to other perspectives and learning from each other and trying to navigate this challenge. So I think it's immensely important to have this sort of interdisciplinary gathering, and to share what we've learned from the research we've all done, but also to generate new ideas and explore new possibilities for what a field of inquiry might look like.
My teaching and research involves teaching about pluralism and teaching towards pluralism. Are there different models for religious pluralism? It might be possible that minority religious tradition would have a different concept and model adopting religious pluralism versus people who are in majority. Then cultural difference can have different models towards pluralism. It's not that like we have been only fighting. People have been living in peace and harmony, and each country, culture, community have done that in their own way. The researcher should think really seriously about if there can be different ways of religious pluralism and models. And conferences such like this can be the best place to think about that. Conferences like this can be really helpful in starting a conversation among scholars. It can serve as really a starting point where people start to think about, learn, engage with one another, and can have plenty of opportunity to go beyond how we think about religious pluralism. So this is an important place.
It's important in my country and in my region, I think mainly because it's borrowed from a colonial word, actually. The phrase was invented by a Dutch, not a British colonial officer, who then went back to Cambridge and wrote a book entitled Colonial Policy and Plural Societies. Right? So the word plural was there, and he meant it in a way that describing the societies there as made up of very different groups of people, ethno-racial, and religious, and they don't combine, into a nation. And so it was important for, colonial states to think about nation building at a point in time in the 1940s, in the decolonization period. Now, in the decolonization period, after he wrote the book, and in the 1950s and 60s, the new countries were coming up in Southeast Asia, they took the term. Right, and they took the term and they began to invent their own forms of pluralism. So coming up with institutional arrangements so as to be able to manage the diversity that's on the ground, the pluralities that's on the ground. So pluralism became an important phrase because it became, in a way, we see ourselves as belonging to multiple communities, and how then do we solve that problem of bringing, about a nation that is unified and solitary. We are starting to talk to each other across disciplinary boundaries, exploring different kind of approaches to understanding the issue. And so I think that conversation will lead, to more interdisciplinary kind of approaches to how to study religious pluralism. It's not yet interdisciplinary. I think interdisciplinary is the aspiration. It becomes interdisciplinary when you have a research project where different people from different disciplines start to work on a central question. They combine their methodologies, and then they try to collect the data and do the interpretation collectively, right, to come up with something. So it should not be siloed still. But this is a great start because the conversations are starting to happen. Right, so I think that's really important because it enriches and it revives your own discipline as you go about doing the interdisciplinary work, and new insights are created. Because ultimately, practitioners don't operate in disciplinary boundaries; they operate in a more holistic environment, so to speak. Right. So if our research and our research output do not address that holistic environment in an interdisciplinary way, the insights will not resonate with them, and therefore the impact of our work will just be limited to an academic study of religion, rather than having a conversation with practitioners, influencing their own practice, and how the practice then can be enriched, and then interfaith, interreligious dialogue can be promoted, right, by that interdisciplinary kind of impact. I think the whole purpose of the university is well, to use a Christian phrase, to be the salt and light of the world, right? Is to influence the world.
I think my attention was first drawn to the necessity for pluralism through my research work, and some findings that came out of the work which we did not expect, and that related to the extent of prejudice and misinformation against minorities, religious minorities, in professional and elite circles. And I think that's where research can be really powerful. And the need also for spaces for dialogue, for people across different cultures to come together, I think also sort of came to the fore. And I was glad to see today that a couple of us pointed to that need. So you might feel the need for religious pluralism or greater dialogue, greater interaction, but I don't think we always have spaces conducive to that kind of an activity. Just the fact that we've come together to discuss what a group of people in the same field think are the most important research agendas in the field and how we might design those agendas is really powerful, I think. We are all affected by the research we do. And I think me reflecting on that myself has brought me to the point where I think religious pluralism is really important. Looking more closely at methodology, I think being an insider, and we see a lot more insider research, as in people from within the communities that we're speaking about, actually, taking on the role of researcher and studying their own communities, has a lot of potential as well. So I think that positionality is also will bring a lot to the study of religious pluralism. I was really quite impressed that the organizers did a lot of homework beforehand to identify who they wanted around the table. And I think that will build strength in the outcomes as well. The session later in the evening where the convening brought in practitioners was extremely powerful. I was almost reduced to tears at points. And I think the practitioners were amazing at sharing very deeply of their experiences and even of themselves. And that, again, inspired us to keep doing the work that we're doing. Because you can sometimes lose connection to what's happening on the ground as academics, and I think that really helped to ground us.
It's very important to understand and first of all define it too, because pluralism can mean different things to different people, especially when we are talking religious pluralism. It becomes problematic for some because they feel that they are the only saved people, whereas for others it shows that there are different ways and different paths to the one God. So religious pluralism also requires or entails that people not only coexist but understand, not only tolerate, but accept and embrace the other. And that's very important in today's world where we live in a global society. We're not living in isolated communities or villages. It's not only scholars who should be talking with each other regarding pluralism. It's communities that should be engaged in. As I say, it's very easy and simple for us to be talking with each other as scholars. But I think the community members need to understand and be engaged with others. There's a greater need to discuss these issues at a mass level. We hardly hear the topic of pluralism being discussed on TV, for example, or on the social media. If you ask the average person, they may not even know what pluralism is, especially religious pluralism. So there is a need for us to be heavily engaged in it in order to promote these ideas. In this conference, I enjoyed reading not only about Islamic understanding of pluralism, but we had Buddhists talking about it. We had pluralism in Africa, for example, in Asia. And to me, that was very enriching. I have always found that by studying the other, my own faith and my own tradition becomes emboldened. It doesn't weaken. By studying the other, I learn more, and I become a better Muslim because of the other. What we do find, interestingly, that the polar opposite of pluralism is what I call fundamentalism. And sometimes these fundamentalists, through their violence, through their intolerance, make louder noise than people who engage in dialogue and talk of pluralism. Because unfortunately, violence makes more noise and makes the news. Pluralism and peace, etc., does not. I don't know of any religion which intrinsically preaches violence. Whether it is Islam, Buddhism, or Christianity, they all preach peace. Unfortunately, it's the people who interpret this text sometimes for their own ends, engage in violence. And instead of creating peace and harmony, they create more conflicts. The diversity, especially religious diversity, is a virtue. It's not a curse. In the Quranic tradition, amongst the signs of God, it says that we have created you in different tribes and different nations so that you may know and understand each other. We are living in a global world today. What I say to you can be heard in Australia at the same time, basically. And therefore, these ideas need to permeate each and every sector of our world. I would go even so far as to say that, in order to create that global world and a very pluralistic world.
Well, I think one of the challenges of pluralism is moving from theory to practice. We need to think about pluralism as to how we can bridge the gap between legal constitutional theory on the one hand, and on the other, on practice and changing social mindsets. How do you bring the narratives of the various communities around the table and keep them in tension without trying to melt them together? And so I think that the idea of a multiple narrative is to keep all the narratives in tension but vibrant in and of themselves. And the purpose of collecting those narratives is not so that you can agree which one is more correct or less correct, but in order to facilitate dialogue between people who have different narratives. You want to bring those voices into the history curriculum of a nation in order to make that possible. Because, the popular saying that history is written by the victor is quite true. And it's not wrong to have different narratives. It's wrong to have them each in our own corner rather than come to the table and share together about those different narratives. And the importance about community narratives is that they shape identity. The identity that is shaped in each community dictates the way I interact with another community, because I see others through my own identity. And that's why it's so important to deal with this diversity. And so maintaining those narratives in tension, I think, is a key component of healthy pluralistic societies. And I think that either merging them into one or allowing one to overpower the other leads to tensions and conflicts and sometimes war. I think that a conference like this actually helps to think about the future of this field of pluralism, not just in theory and in academia, but also in practice and in lived experience. Because I think often disciplines don't speak to each other in the academia.
But it's just kind of realistic. It just seems childish, provincial, in the long run, not optimal at all, and frankly, very destructive not to recognize the most obvious thing in the world, which is that people are different. And at the same time, people have a lot in common. Every tradition, religious, spiritual, secular, humanist, medical, has resources for optimizing one's worldview in the sense of for optimizing one's connection with others, with all the things that we think are congruent with tolerance. And I do want to use tolerance in its more expansive sense of genuine appreciation, respect, enjoyment, learning, all of those things. So there are many resources for that, and this interests me. My focus is the Buddhist tradition, which is all about what is it about our wrong ways of thinking, empirically wrong ways of thinking, also sometimes ethically wrong, but they're different tracks, that make life so difficult for us. Pain is inevitable in this world. I'm speaking from Buddhist traditions, but we are actually the sources of it in the sense that, and the main source really in the end, you can summarize and say it has to do with an undue sense of separation of self and other, subject and object, here and there. I feel that this country is foreign and far away, but if I take a plane there, it's right there, and my place of departure is far away. Religious pluralism starts, it seems to me, from a fundamental recognition that everybody deserves appreciation, every culture, every tradition, no matter whether you understand it or not, just on the basic level of the commonality we have as living beings. For tolerance to be really robust, and alive in individuals, I think that some kind of training is required, like people are doing now for anti-racist training, for example, because it takes a certain kind of emotional maturity, something, a willingness to humility, things that we might not have had to cultivate too much if we're privileged, and one must.